good one. The poem, in 5 or 6 ways, is acting the way the brain says it should act. Now, most poems, especially of this era, writing in quatrains and so forth, did exactly the opposite. They were in the groove, and the rhyme came, and the quatrain rhythm came, right? And Dickinson is essentially theorizing about the way her poem refuses to go in a groove. All right, so stay on the line, both of you, please, but let a splinter swerve 'twere easier for you to put a current back when floods have slit the hills. We are now directly in the analogy to the floods. Slit the hills. Have either of you, Anne or Tom, you're both in southern place, well, Anne's not in the south, but you're in a place that I imagine floods will get. Have either of you witnessed flooding?
But there's plenty of extreme weather where I live, yeah, so some flooding.
Tom, any flooding by you?
I saw some flooding a long time ago when I lived in New Orleans, but not too much.
New Orleans would be a place, yes. So what does she mean by slit the hills? What actually is happening there, Tom?
That's confusing. You know, I'm tempted to sort of avoid that word, you know, and picture the flood sort of running over them.
Yeah.
Slit the hills, I guess, gone in between them, I guess is.
Yes. Well, the next line will help us. When floods have slit the hills and scooped a turnpike for themselves. For themselves? Tom, why would floods act in that way? For themselves?
Oh, wow.
Anne, help him?
Well, I mean, I had to drive through Wisconsin this summer, and there was so much flooding there that it had actually moved the river over.
It moved the big river, the Mississippi?
It moved the big river over, not the Mississippi.
The biggest river we have is the Mississippi. It moves. It actually does move. What river were you thinking of?
Well, it was the one that goes through the middle of Wisconsin. I can't remember the name.
That one,
right
okay.
now.
All right.
But it still was, but it's like, well, the water moves the earth. It reshapes the geography.
Didn't we find out in the New Orleans situation and the Gulf Coast situation that that water will find its own way, and that the hardest thing you could do, unless you're the Army Corps of Engineers, well, even if you're the Army Corps of Engineers, you cannot tell it which way to go. It will go in the way it goes. Now, do you think that's the way the mind works? Do you think that Dickinson, yeah, both of you do, obviously. Do you think that Dickinson is, okay, so that's cool. So now I'm going to ask both of you, thank you for calling, both of you to hang up. And in the case of Anne, don't hang up until Jamie Lee's done that, because we have a technology thing. In the case of Tom, thank you for calling. And now I'm going to ask, someone else, a brave person, either to email or to call us so we can talk about the last line of the poem.
Oh, I don't know what I did.
That's okay. So the last line of the poem is, and trodden out the mills. And trodden out the mills. Trodden is either a made-up word or a rare word or an archaic word. And trodden out the mills. The reason why this is hard is that mills, we have not seen anything about mills in this poem so far. They've just appeared. Mills have appeared. There could be a hint of mills prior, so I'm asking anyone who has any idea about this last line to call us at 215-573-9752 or 215-422-2928.
Wow.
Get
Can
a
I read you
response?
it?
Yes,
no,
please.
but it's a beautiful comment.
Go
This
ahead.
is from Ray. It sounds as if the second part of the poem corrects the first. The brain only seems to be a smoothly running machine, but the slightest impediment reveals that it is actually a vast, violent, and uncontrollable flood.
That's
beautiful.
great, Ray. Thank you. Ray's right. And somebody's calling. You want to get it? The metaphors have run amok, just like the flood.
Hello?
So we're about to be overwhelmed. We could call in the Army Corps of Engineers of formal poetry to try to
Bob, what's your
right
last name,
this
Bob?
crazy ship, to
Oh,
try to put
wonderful.
in good rhymes.
Okay, let me see if I can get you on speakerphone.
Okay, and who's calling?
This is Bob Brylowski.
Oh, Bob. No, you don't want to do that. You don't want to end the call. You want to put it on. There you go. Hello, Bob. Can you hear me?
iPhone.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, we're going to put you up on mic. Allison will do her magic. Say something now, Bob.
Hello? Hello, I don't know. Well, I missed Ann.
Allison, can you bring him up a little bit?
Say hello to Ann from an old book club member.
Hold on, Bob. We're trying to get your volume up. It's pretty close. Say something again, Bob.
Oh, I was just saying to say hello to Ann, who is another Dickinson book club member.
And you're a regular participant in our online book groups, and so is Ann. So, and you guys have probably never met, and I don't think I've met you. Have I met you?
I don't think so.
No.
I've been out in California for quite a few years.
And maybe this is the first time I've even heard your voice. So are you ready, Bob, to take us through the last line?
Well, you asked me earlier about I had talked about the sewing mills, and that was the sewing machine. That was because I was thinking of the last line about the mills, and I was thinking about New England and how it had run on water power, and they had built these mills and had created, to create the sewing industry and the garment industry.
Bob, we have a bad connection. I'm going to ask you to speak slowly because I think we can catch what you're saying if you speak slowly.
Okay. I was saying was actually when you had asked earlier about my comment about a sewing machine, I was thinking about the last line about the mills.
Right.
How important that was in New England with the water power.
Oh, yes.
And how that had built the basis of the garment industry where they had people working the machines.
That's great. So you've just solved the problem, Bob, and I knew you would do this because you're so good at these book groups. You knew what was coming at the end, and you're looking back and to see if there's any hint of mills, and you found it, which is a reference to textile, which is the main industry of New England of that time. So that's terrific. So now let's go to the mills. What do the mills have to do with the flood?
Only I didn't think too much about them as being the same metaphor, but a flood would certainly overwhelm the water, the water power.
Yes.
The wheels.
So let's go. Let's take
overpower them and sort of trot it out. I'm thinking of like treading out the vineyards at the rafts or something.
Oh yeah, that's maybe where trodden comes from. Let's take a step backward. For those people watching us tonight who don't know about mills, because mills are industrial and we no longer live in an industrial age, and these mills go back to the 19th century. Where did we put mills, and why did we put them there? Bob?
Well, you put them next to rivers.
You put them right next to rivers.
Because you put water wheels in the river, and that was the power that would run the mills.
Exactly. So what Emily Dickinson is saying is that the mills, which have been put, they've been put where the river currently exists, in order to produce power from the currently existing located rivers. Now, when a flood changes the location of the rivers, because the flood waters slit the hills and make turnpikes for themselves, it's possible and observed that the river she couldn't name in Wisconsin actually changed locations. Any mill built along the old location is now rendered defunct.
Well, yeah, turnpike for themselves, they don't want to be harnessed by the mills anymore or subjected by the mills.
It's all, I mean, if
subdued you could, by the mills, they're sort of overpowering the mills or sort of exerting their own control and saying, I'm not going to let you use me anymore.
You can't use me anymore. I'm nature. That's right. The water is got a brain of its own in a way, but of course the whole thing goes back to a comparison with the brain. So now the brain is operating in this way. It's so resistant to being tracked and coursed that the brain, if you set up mills next to the brain, a mill next to the brain would be what? The SAT instructor trying to get you to produce something out of that big brain, or the boss who's waiting for that report is the mill or the project that you must complete.
Or rhymes and hymns.
Or rhymes and hymns, forcing you to put the mill next to the brain. And then the brain acts like a flood and goes wherever it wants to, such as in a poem like this. Then it wipes away the very idea of the mills, and the mills are useless and nothing gets produced, and the whole idea of production gets questioned. What do you think, Bob, Jessica, either of you?
Well, there's something to that. The image I had more was that the brain was operating like a machine, discipline, order,
Right.
so forth. And then what I put in the email was that something unexpected comes in, and the brain suddenly just goes off on a different track.
Exactly. It goes off in a
And
different
once
track.
it goes on that track, once it has a new thought,
Right.
or
A
a new
new
experience
thought.
or something, it can't go back to the old track anymore.
Very nice.
It's got a new channel.
It suggests all kinds of possibilities for this poem, and what we're going to do now is just wrap up to suggest some conclusions. Bob, I want to thank you for calling, and it was great to hear your voice after all these years.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Al, for another great Dickinson discussion.
My
Bye.
pleasure, Bob. I appreciate it.
Take care.
So, Jessica, it's possible, there are several critiques possible in this poem. One is, what Bob was suggesting was that the brain resists being told how to think.
Mm-hmm.
But I tend to, and I'm curious to hear your reaction, I tend to think this is more radical even than that. That's pretty radical. I tend to think that this is a kind of, she's using an anti-capitalist, anti-industrial idea as a way of talking about how completely radical her way of thinking is. That is to say, the basis of capitalism, northern New England industrial capitalism, was you put a mill somewhere and you take advantage of power.
Mm-hmm.
And she's saying, ha ha ha, the power isn't ever where you think it's going to be.
Absolutely, and I think at least one of our emailers said that there's something very violent here. It's not just that the river moves, it's a violent action. And Claire Marcus just reminded us that this is also talking geological time, that when water slits a hill, that's like the Grand Canyon. So that there's something so powerful about the brain that it's beyond the small-scale human industry.
Well, certainly,
it's huge.
it's Claire Marcus, right?
Yeah.
A friend Claire from some north of here, maybe an hour north of here. Claire is certainly right that Dickinson is kind of, she loves to talk about things like volcanoes and floods. And of course, volcanoes are obviously geological as well. But what do you think, Jessica? The idea that go ahead, put the mill there, be industrial. I'm beyond industrial.
I'll tear it down.
I'll tear it
I'll
down.
tear it
My
down.
brain will tear it down. She's the most powerful person in the world. Emily
Absolutely.
Dickinson is.
It's her head contains the world. Her poetry contains the world, and we read it and similarly contain the world.
The sheer power, both poems.
Yeah.
I picked these randomly, but they're both. I guess you could pick two Dickinson poems randomly and they would say the same thing. They're both about the sheer power of her brain, of her imagination. In the first poem, as Irwin pointed out appropriately, there's a kind of condescension or elitism in her saying, I can deliver this, or this is what you're going to get from one of my poems. I can soften the power. I have the power and I can soften it. The second poem, she doesn't want to soften it because she wants to get rid of anyone who would be so in the box and so conventional that they would dare set up a mill next to the imagination.
She's a little frightening.
She's frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's very frightening.